Good morning. Welcome to this circle, an affirming and inclusive community that gathers in so many different ways. We gather to work together, to learn together, to eat together, to heal life's hurts together, to support society's vulnerable members together. And then we gather in this circle each week to pause and consider how we are living and what it is we need to live our highest values, to inspire each other, to persist in helping to create a more fair and a more just world, a healthy planet, and for us to evolve into our highest humanity. Each week we're privileged to gather on this land, the ancestral home of the Cree people of Treaty 6, the traditional lands of the Papaschase Nation and the home of our Métis neighbors. And as we gather in this place, we affirm our intention to continue to participate in healing the wounds of our history and to persist with one another in building a more respectful and mutual future with one another. As we gather, we celebrate the wisdom, the culture, the traditions, the language, the spiritualities of our Indigenous peoples, and we seek to learn the wisdom they have to share. With hope and with commitment, we open to this new day, this day we've never seen before, this new day that's dawning. There's some words on the screen that would help complete the thoughts I place before us as words to center us in this time and in this place. Like a toddler taking a first few steps. If we don't give up, amazing things can happen. Like an athlete in training. Like a child learning the alphabet. Like bulbs planted in autumn. Like a young tree stretching toward the light. Like you and me in our quest for a higher humanity and a more equitable world. When we come into this circle, we come as a way of strengthening our intentions to live more nearly as we pray. And so I invite us to offer these words with one another as a way of strengthening our intentions in the ways we would hope and choose to live. Into this circle we come, opening to the wisdom in words and gestures, songs and silences, readings and reflections, prayers and symbols, wisdom within, between, and beyond us. We gather to support one another as we persist in seeking to create a more just and compassionate world. We come to share comfort in the midst of our losses, compassion in the midst of cruelty, justice in the midst of inequity, stillness in the midst of busyness. We gather to find the wisdom that deepens our living as spiritual beings in a human experience. May we be inspired to live our highest values. As morning comes again, we celebrate Earth's oldest ritual, turning to and from our day star. As morning comes again, we welcome the persistence of light that keeps coming out of darkness, that keeps warming our days. And as we light this candle, we celebrate the light that keeps bringing life to our planet, the light of wisdom that keeps bringing nurture to our spirits, the light in each other's eyes that warms the spaces between us. In this light, and in the light of a new day, we focus our gratitude as we greet the morning.
I want to invite anyone who wants to come to the carpet for a time for all ages. I spent all day yesterday watching cat videos. Do you ever do that? No? Just me then. Well, I found some videos that I want to show you, and then I want to ask you, after we watch 3 of them, why you think I picked these 3 videos to show you, okay? They're all kind of fun, and they're all about cats or dogs. Here we go. For sure. What do you think all these animals, why did I show these 3 animal videos? Why do you think? What were they all, what was alike in all of them? Any ideas? Liam? They were all doing something funny, that's true. What else? They were trying to work hard, yes. What else? They were trying to get things they wanted, yeah. They had to do something to get that thing, right? And they didn't have to do it just once, right? Over and over again. They had to try again and again and again. So there's a word that we have for when you have to try something again and again and again, and it's the word persistent. Have you ever heard that word? Persistent? If you're persistent, it means you try, and you try, and you try, and you try. Those three animals were very persistent. They were going to do it until they got it, right? Yeah, so that's an example of being persistent. Do any of you have to be persistent to do something? What do you have to try again and again to do? Mm-hmm. Piano practice. Thank you, Liam. That takes a lot of persistence. You're right. What else? What else takes persistence that you do? Yes. Tests, yeah, to get ready for a test. Yeah, that's it. And who here has ever remembers what it was like the first time you got on a tricycle or a bicycle? Do you remember? Is it easy the first time? It is not. Did you fall a couple times? You fell once. And then you tried again, right? Good work. That's persistence, when we keep trying to do something. So persistence is very important. And you know, in Kids Spirit, we're learning all the different ways that we are able to work and to live in peaceful ways. And you know, when you go to Kids Spirit today, you're going to learn more about peace and the ways that we work and live in peaceful ways. That takes persistence. Because sometimes it's not so peaceful. We have to keep trying to live in a peaceful world and to make a peaceful world. And for all of us, we all do things that we have to keep trying at. All of us. So, we've learned a new word. We're all going to try to be persistent at the things that we really want to accomplish and really want to do. So thank you for coming up here. We're going to sing a song, and while we sing that song, I'll invite you to go to Kids Spirit, and I'll invite any youth in the room to go downstairs to Youth Cafe.
From the contemporary poet Mark Nepo, in his collection of writings called The Book of Awakening, he has this piece that he entitled, "The Way is Hard, but Clear." The naturalist and environmentalist Kevin Scribner tells us that when salmon make their way upstream, they do so by bumping repeatedly into blocked pathways until they find the place where the current is strongest. And they know that the unimpeded rush of water means that there's no obstacle there. And so they enter this opening fervently, for though it is the hardest going, the way is clear. The lesson here is as unnerving as it is helpful. In facing both our inner and outer adversaries, the passage of truth comes at us with such powerful momentum because it's clear and unimpeded. And so where we sense the rush of truth is where we must give our all. As human beings, the blocked pathways of our journey take many different forms. And whether it's in avoiding conflict with others, or not taking the risk to love, or in not accepting the call of spirit that would have us participate more fully in our days, it's often easier to butt up continually against these blocked pathways than to enter fervently into the one passage that's powerfully clear. Salmon innately model a healthy persistence by showing us how to keep nosing for the unimpeded way, and when we find it, how to work even harder to make our way through. Some say it's easier for salmon, since the power of their drive to end where they begin isn't compromised by the endless considerations that often keep us from truth. Still, it's the heart's capacity to rise one more time after falling down, no matter how bruised, that verifies such a desire in us too. Because like salmon, our way depends not just on facing things head on, but in moving our whole being through the way where the hardest is going, but the way that's clear. This is an image of persistence that comes to us from the natural world.
Here's another reading from, this time from the Christian tradition, from the book of Acts, chapter 12. King Herod got it into his head to go after some of those following the way of Jesus. He had murdered James, John's brother. And when he saw how much it raised his popularity ratings, he arrested Peter, all this during Passover week, and had him thrown in jail, putting 4 squads of 4 soldiers each to guard him. He was planning a public execution after Passover. All the time that Peter was under heavy guard in the jailhouse, his friends prayed for him most strenuously. Then the time came for Herod to bring him out for the kill. That night, even though shackled to 2 soldiers, one on either side, Peter slept like a baby, and there were guards at the doors keeping their eyes on the place. Herod was taking no chances. Suddenly, there was a stranger at his side and light flooding the room. The stranger shook Peter and got him up. "Hurry!" Well, the handcuffs fell off his wrists as the stranger said, "Get dressed, put on your belt and shoes." Peter did it. "Grab your coat, let's get out of here." And Peter followed this stranger, but thought all along that he was dreaming. Past the first guard and then the second, they came to the iron gate that led into the city. It swung open before them on its own, and they were out on the street, free as the breeze. At the first intersection, the stranger left him, going his own way. That's when Peter realized this was no dream. Still shaking his head, amazed, he went to Mary's house. This is the Mary who was John Mark's mother. The house was packed with praying friends, and when he knocked on the door to the courtyard, a young woman named Rhoda came to see who it was. But when she recognized Peter's voice, she was so excited and eager to tell everyone that Peter was there that she forgot to open the door and left him standing on the street. But they wouldn't believe her, actually, dismissing her. They dismissed her report. "You're crazy," they said. She stuck by her story, insisting. Still wouldn't believe her. All this time, poor Peter was still standing out on the street, continuing to knock. This is a story passed down by our tradition of an early community following the way of Jesus. May we find wisdom for our life.
It probably doesn't surprise you to know that I would be a complete failure as a Jehovah's Witness. Or a census taker, or an Avon lady, or a Fuller Brush salesperson, or any job that depended on making cold calls. Maybe some of you share my deep aversion to knocking on a door where I'm not expected or I'm not immediately welcome. And maybe it's my deep-seated aversion to knocking on doors that draws me to this first century story and its colorful character, Peter. We know Peter as that guy who is prone to open mouth, insert foot. We know him as that Galilean fisherman who walked off the job hitching his wagon to a radical wisdom teacher we call Jesus of Nazareth. We know Peter as this impulsive and reactive character, quicker to engage his mouth than his brain, sometimes loyal, other times cowardly and disloyal, the most unlikely leader of a disheartened community after the empire executed their leader and shattered their dreams of social, religious, political change. This jailbreak story is set sometime after the death of Jesus, when the authorities are trying to silence those who would continue his vision and perpetuate his teachings. Some of them have been murdered, others have been imprisoned, many are in hiding. And then someone with a great sense of humor and a really good imagination and a flair for drama creates this story, which gives us a sense of these most dangerous and difficult times when this fledgling reform within Judaism that would eventually become known as Christianity was just beginning to emerge. When we meet Peter in the world of this story, he is locked behind not only closed doors, but prison doors. He's being held without bail, not because he was accused of murder or robbery or treason, but because of the ideas he expressed and those with whom he kept company. He was behind locked doors because some in power took pleasure in his arrest and hoped soon to take delight in his execution, as they had taken delight in the execution of his leader. There was a very successful campaign going on to imprison and execute many of the new leaders of this movement who were following the teachings of Jesus. Like so many who threatened the status quo with their resistance to domination, with their vision of another way, with their hope for a more just and equitable social arrangement, for challenging a social order that works for a few. Peter was incarcerated for the ideas he articulated, the vision he voiced, and the company he kept. Without ever letting the facts get in the way of a good story, we hear this great prison break story that begins behind those locked doors. If we were to make a movie of this story, I think we'd want the theme music from Mission Impossible. And then we'd want to dress Tom Cruise in black spandex as the leader of the Midnight Mission, give him some high-tech gadgets to infiltrate the prison and bust Peter out of his shackles. And we'd want to equip his team with drugs to inject that will induce sleep in the guards. I don't know who we'd need to play Peter, but it would be some slow-moving, skinny guy that's kind of absent-minded and doesn't have any fashion sense. Because most of the dialogue in this story to break this guy out of prison is concerned with what he's going to wear when he gets out on the street. His jailbreaker's first words make some kind of sense, I suppose. Get up quickly. Doesn't seem to me if I were in those circumstances I'd need anyone to hurry me along. And then fasten your belt. Why? So your pants won't fall down? Surely the embarrassment of losing your drawers would pale in comparison with losing your neck. And then don't forget your sandals. Like can't leave home without your shoes or can't leave prison without your sandals, apparently. It must be a crime to go barefoot. And then put on your coat. Sort of like, here's your hat, what's your hurry? This midnight messenger is sounding a whole lot more like a Jewish mother. The action part of the film is great, but the script could use a lot of work. After the prison scene, the drama's over for the Mission Impossible team, and they leave the set never to be heard from again. But it's not over for Peter. Once he gets past the sleeping guards and he gets through the iron gates, Peter is suddenly alone in the dark, in the middle of the night, in some back alley, pinching himself to see if he's really awake. When it occurs to him to make his way through the silent streets to the home of a friend. Beyond the door on which he knocks, his friends have gathered to pray for him. Although the answer to their prayers is standing on the other side of the door, they experience his knock as an intrusion, an interruption. There they are on their knees, and there he is on his knuckles. And they are the answer to each other's prayers, if only they would notice. Together, they have what they're looking for. And what they seek will only come from each other. No supernatural divine intruder is going to answer their prayers. They have the power to answer one another's prayer. And they send a servant to deal with that interruption. She hears a voice she apparently recognizes, but doesn't open the door. And when Rhoda tells them it's Peter at the door, they tell her she's out of her mind. And no one opens the door. But the story says Peter continued to knock. He could have panicked and fled. He could have second-guessed himself and thought he was at the wrong door. He could have given up and tried somewhere else, but Peter continued to knock. Because he was in a no-stopping zone. He was in one of those times and places in life where despite our white knuckles or despite our tired and sore knuckles, everything depends on staying with it. He was in one of those times and one of those places where it all depends on keeping up the noise, keeping up the pressure, keeping up the momentum. There can be no stopping. You have to go on knocking. For anything to be different, we have to continue the interference. We have to continue the interruption. We have to continue the unanswered but persistent knock. It's really easy to quit knocking. Our knuckles get tired. It's easy to give up. It's easy to give in. It's hard to keep knocking. Some of us are great sprinters. We're good starters. And we have great energy, and we have speed for the short burst. But so much in life asks us to be marathoners. To be in the run for the long haul. To persist. To be like the African grandmothers, caring for their grandchildren, for the millions of children orphaned by HIV and AIDS, to persevere against unjust inheritance laws and poverty and land grabs and the cruel illness that has infected more than 30 million Africans, wiping out so much of the middle generation. To refuse to be silent. So much in life depends on our persistence. For us to keep moving like all the planets do. To be inspired by the wisdom of nature like salmon swimming upstream, moving where the current is strongest, hurling themselves up the falls, determined to return to the spawning grounds of their birth and their death. To be like the birds, building a nest for the next generation, twig by twig by twig. To be like the animals, patiently teaching their young how to survive. To be like the bamboo, silently and invisibly supporting the life that will come in time by putting so much energy into its roots. To persist in seeking to make a positive difference, irrespective of the evidence of growth or progress. To persist against sexism and ageism and racism and elitism and homophobia and entitlement. When Peter continued to knock, it was his finest hour. When we refuse to give up our vision of wholeness despite disease and brokenness, we continue to knock. When we refuse to surrender our search for peace despite the outbreaks of violence, we continue to knock. When we resist the illusions of privilege and security, irrespective of the propaganda of entitlement, we continue to knock. Whenever we insist there's no peace and justice for us until there's peace and justice for all, we are continuing to knock. When we seek compassion in a world that seems to take delight in revenge, we're continuing to knock. When we refuse to let any authority limit or control or withhold the rituals that bring peace in death and dying or in life celebrations, we're continuing to knock. When we resist any narrow definition of what it is to be Jewish or Muslim or Hindu or Christian or Buddhist or any religious or spiritual identity, we're continuing to knock. When we refuse to let hate win, we keep on knocking. And when we insist on being heard by those who take refuge behind the safety of closed doors, closed minds, closed hearts, closed imaginations, closed systems, we're refusing to stop as we continue to knock. This is a time for us to pause and consider the long conversation between persistence and impatience. To ask ourselves, where can there be no stopping? To ask ourselves, On what door must we continue to knock?
As we gather for this ritual around our table, I invite you to respond as we speak the words, "If we don't give up." Please respond with the phrase, "Transformation can happen." Today, many gather around tables, great and small, to celebrate in a variety of ways and languages a tradition of worldwide communion. We gather today at this table not to speak any magic words or invoke any supernatural power, but to call ourselves into the collective energy of being a spiritual community with one another that supports and encourages each other to persist in seeking justice, in loving kindness, in walking humbly on this good and generous earth. If we don't give up, transformation can happen. We share a bit of bread knowing its journey from seed to grain, from field to mill, a journey of persistence in the midst of sun and rain to satisfy our hunger. Sharing bread, we remember, if we don't give up, transformation can happen.
And we share grapes that are grown and crushed from vine to vat. A journey of great persistence of sun and rain. And we remember that if we don't give up,
transformation can happen.
We find inspiration for our persistence in some of the stories of our ancestors in this tradition. Those who gathered and shared bread and hope with one another in the midst of their fears. Those who found courage to persist even in the midst of powers that were bent on crushing their dreams and ending their movement to be a force of love and a force of fairness in a cruel and difficult time. As we share their stories and refashion their rituals, we remember, if we don't give up,
transformation can happen. So we invite you to this table, not because of what you believe or don't believe, not because you're a member of this spiritual community or any church, but we invite you because you're welcome to share in a ritual to strengthen our collective intentions to not be daunted by the enormity of the world's grief, but to persist in doing justice, loving mercy, walking humbly together. This bread we share might represent for us the bread of persistence. This cup might remind us that we're not alone as we share the cup of community. We're all invited to this table and to these gifts of this earth. May we come and find our way, remembering that if we don't give up, transformation can happen. One of the gifts that the 20th century has given to us in this 21st century is the knowledge that energy is never lost. All energy persists. The energy we now see in this candle that has been lighting us for the last hour, despite being blown out, the energy persists. The energy is transformed. Our energy, too, goes from this place to make a difference in our lives and in our world. When we persist, amazing things happen. May we go in the spirit of community, in the spirit of energy, and in the spirit of love to persist in all that we might do.